It began with a whisper carried on the biting autumn wind. A warning passed from one trembling voice to another in the small, insular town of Black Hollow. Do not speak to the man in the yellow coat. He knows too much, they'd say, their faces pale with fear and their voices barely louder than a breath. To newcomers, it sounded like local folklore, a small-town myth designed to frighten children. But for the residents, it was a matter of survival. Anna Cole, a newcomer to Black Hollow, didn't believe in ghost stories. She moved to the town for its quiet streets and charming Victorian homes, far removed from the chaos of the city. At 27, she was a realist, a woman who didn't scare easily. As she unpacked her belongings in her newly purchased home, she overheard her neighbors speaking in hushed tones about the yellow-coated man. He was seen again near Maplewood, a woman whispered to her husband. "And old Mr. Hutchins?" the man asked, his voice quivering. "Gone, just like the others," the woman replied, clutching her shawl tighter. Curiosity piqued. Anna stepped out to introduce herself, hoping to quell their apparent unease. "Excuse me," she called out. "I couldn't help but overhear. Who's the man in the yellow coat?" The couple froze. The woman's face drained of color, and the man pulled her closer, as if Anna's question itself were a threat. "You shouldn't ask such things," he muttered. "It's best to stay out of it." They hurried away, leaving Anna standing on the cobblestone path, confused but intrigued. That evening, Anna decided to visit the local library. The town's archive was modest but meticulously organized, its shelves lined with dusty tomes and yellowing newspapers. She approached the elderly librarian, Mrs. Grayson, whose rheumy eyes seemed to pierce through her. "I'm looking for information about a man in a yellow coat," Anna said hesitantly. The room fell silent. Mrs. Grayson's hands trembled as she clutched her pen. "Why would you want to know about him?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just curious," Anna replied, feigning nonchalance. Mrs. Grayson hesitated before gesturing for Anna to follow her. She led her to a corner of the library where a single dusty box sat atop a wooden table. "This is all we have," she said, her voice tinged with apprehension. "But I warn you, some things are better left unknown." Inside the box were newspaper clippings, photographs, and handwritten accounts. Anna's eyes were immediately drawn to a photograph of a man in a long yellow coat standing at the edge of a foggy forest. His face was obscured by the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. Beneath the photo was a caption, "Last known sighting of George Hutchins, 1963. As Anna sifted through the materials, a chilling pattern emerged. The man in the yellow coat had been sighted multiple times over the decades, always just before someone vanished. The victims were diverse, men, women, children, but they all had one thing in common. No trace of them was ever found. The accounts described an unnatural presence. "His voice isn't quite right," one witness had written. "It echoes, even when he whispers. And his eyes, they see through you." Another described him as knowing things no one should, secrets, fears, sins. Despite herself, Anna felt a chill creep up her spine. But skepticism prevailed. "Just an urban legend," she muttered under her breath. That night, Anna couldn't sleep. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows of her old house. At 2 a.m., she finally gave up and decided to make herself a cup of tea. As she stood by the kitchen window, staring out into the darkened street, she saw him. A figure stood beneath the flickering street lamp, dressed in a long yellow coat. The brim of his hat cast a shadow over his face, but she could feel his gaze fixed on her. Her breath caught in her throat. He raised a hand, not in a wave, but in a deliberate gesture, beckoning her. Anna stumbled back from the window, her heart pounding. When she dared to look again, he was gone. The next day, she tried to convince herself it had been a trick of the light, her overactive imagination fueled by the eerie stories. But as she walked through town, she felt the eyes of the townsfolk on her, their gazes heavy with pity and fear. By evening, Anna's resolve was crumbling. She decided to confront the mystery head-on and return to the library. Mrs. Grayson wasn't there, but a young assistant greeted her with a nervous smile. "I need more information about the man in the yellow coat," Anna said, The assistant hesitated before nodding. "There's someone who might be able to help," she said. "But you won't like it." "Who?" Anna asked, desperate. "Mrs. Holloway. She's the only one who's ever spoken to him and lived to tell about it." Mrs. Holloway lived on the outskirts of town in a crumbling cottage surrounded by overgrown hedges. The air around the house was oppressive, and Anna's footsteps felt heavier as she approached the door. When the frail woman answered, her eyes were sharp despite her advanced age. "You've seen him, haven't you?" she said without preamble. Anna nodded, her throat dry. Mrs. Holloway motioned for her to enter. The interior of the house was dimly lit, cluttered with trinkets and faded photographs. "He came to me 50 years ago," the old woman began. "Asked me a question I couldn't refuse to answer." "What did he ask?" Anna pressed. Mrs. Holloway's gaze grew distant. "He asked what I feared most, and when I answered, he smiled, a terrible, knowing smile. Then he said, 'You'll see me again when it's time.'" She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "He knows things, child, things no one should know. And once he sets his sights on you, there's no escape." Anna left the house with more questions than answers, her mind racing. As she walked back through the darkened streets, she felt it again, that sensation of being watched. And then she heard it, a voice, soft and echoing, carried on the wind. Anna, her name, spoken by a man she had never met, but who somehow knew her. She turned, and there he was, standing under the pale glow of the moon, his yellow coat gleaming like a warning. Anna froze. Her breath caught in her throat as the man in the yellow coat stood motionless beneath the moonlight. Despite the distance between them, she could feel his presence, a weight pressing against her chest. He didn't move closer, but he didn't have to. The air around her felt colder, heavier, as if the world itself recoiled from him. "Anna," he called again, his voice an unnatural harmony of whispers and echoes. Every instinct told her to run, but something held her in place. Curiosity? Fear? Or was it something deeper, something she couldn't yet understand? "What do you want?" she managed to say, her voice trembling. The man tipped his head slightly, as though amused by her question. "I have no one," he said, his words unsettlingly calm. "But I do have something to offer, a truth." Anna's heart thudded in her chest. A truth? It sounded absurd, but there was a pull to his words, like an invisible thread drawing her closer. She took an involuntary step forward before catching herself. "I don't need your truth," she said, trying to sound resolute. His smile was faint but chilling. "Everyone needs the truth, Anna. The question is, are you willing to ask for it?" The world seemed to grow quieter, the distant sounds of rustling leaves and chirping insects fading away. It was as if the universe held its breath, waiting for her response. Before Anna could reply, the man turned and began walking toward the edge of the forest at the end of the street. His yellow coat seemed to shimmer faintly in the moonlight. Without thinking, Anna followed him. The forest was darker than she had anticipated, the canopy above swallowing the light of the moon. The man moved effortlessly, his footsteps silent against the carpet of dead leaves. Anna stumbled behind him, struggling to keep up, but unable to stop herself. "Where are we going?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "To a place where truth resides," he said without turning. They came to a clearing where a circle of ancient, moss-covered stones stood like sentinels around a jagged pit in the earth. A faint, pulsating light emanated from the pit, casting eerie shadows across the stones. The air here felt charged, crackling faintly like a distant storm. "What is this place?" Anna asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is where questions are answered," the man replied. He turned to face her, his features still obscured by the brim of his hat. "But be warned, truth is not always kind." Anna felt a surge of anger rise in her chest, cutting through her fear. "Why me? Why are you doing this to me?" "Because you asked," he said simply. "The moment you sought to learn about me, you invited me into your life. And now you must decide. Will you ask your question, or will you walk away and live in ignorance?" Anna hesitated, every fiber of her being screamed at her to leave, to turn and run back to the safety of her home. But the pull of the unknown was too strong. She needed to know. "What happens if I don't ask?" she asked. "Then you will never see me again," he said. "But the questions in your heart will remain, gnawing at you until your final breath." His words cut deep because they rang true. Anna stepped closer to the pit, the strange light reflecting in her wide eyes. "If I ask, will I regret it?" The man chuckled softly, the sound both chilling and strangely soothing. "Regret is a human luxury. I am merely a messenger." She clenched her fists, taking a deep breath. "Fine," she said. "I'll ask." The man inclined his head, a gesture of acknowledgement. "Speak your question, and the truth will reveal itself." Anna stared into the pit, the light within swirling like liquid fire. Her mind raced, sifting through the many questions that had haunted her since she first heard of the man. But one stood out above the rest, a question that had lingered in the deepest recesses of her mind for years. "Why did my brother die?" she asked, her voice cracking. The air grew still, the forest silent as if nature itself had paused to listen. The light in the pit flared brighter, and the stones around them seemed to hum with energy. The man in the yellow coat stepped closer, his presence more overwhelming than ever. "Your brother did not die by chance," he said, his voice softer now. "He died because someone made a choice to take from him what they believed was theirs." Anna's heart raced. "What do you mean? Who made the choice?" The man extended a hand, his gloved fingers pointing to the pit. "Look, and you will see." Reluctantly, Anna stepped closer and peered into the glowing chasm. At first, she saw nothing but swirling light, but then shapes began to form. She saw her brother, Sam, laughing in the backyard of their childhood home. Then the scene shifted. Sam arguing with someone, a shadowy figure whose features were unclear. The argument grew heated, and Anna could feel the tension as if she were there. The shadowy figure lunged, shoving Sam backward. He fell, striking his head against a jagged rock. Blood pooled beneath him as the shadowy figure stood over him, panicking. "No," Anna whispered, tears streaming down her face. The vision faded, and she turned to the man in the yellow coat. "Who was it? Who killed him?" "The answer lies in your own memory," he said. "You already know." The weight of his words hit her like a blow. Flashes of suppressed memories surfaced. Her parents' hushed conversations, the way her cousin Mark had avoided her after Sam's death, the tension in their family gatherings. It all pointed to him. "It was Mark," she whispered, her voice shaking with both rage and grief. The man nodded. "The truth can be a heavy burden. Now you must decide what to do with it." Anna stared at him, her mind racing. She had sought the truth, and now that she had it, she didn't know if she could bear it. "Why do you do this?" she asked him. "Because the truth demands to be heard," he replied. "And because people like you ask for it." Without another word, he turned and began walking back into the forest. "Wait!" Anna called after him. "What am I supposed to do now?" He paused, glancing back at her. "That is your choice, Anna. But remember this. Truth, once known, cannot be undone." And with that, he disappeared into the darkness, leaving Anna alone with the weight of what she had learned. The truth burned like a brand in Anna's mind as she stumbled back through the forest, the oppressive quiet making her every breath sound too loud. She replayed the vision over and over. The shadowy figure, the fall, the blood, and the stark, undeniable conclusion. Mark had killed her brother. By the time she reached her house, the sky had begun to lighten, streaks of pale dawn filtering through the trees. Anna locked her door and leaned against it, her pulse still racing. The man in the yellow coat was gone, but his presence lingered like a shadow in her mind. The truth he had said couldn't be undone, and now she couldn't unsee what she had learned. Over the next few days, Anna withdrew from the world, her mind consumed by the revelation. She combed through her memories, piecing together fragments of conversations and glances from her family's past. Mark had always been volatile, quick to anger, but equally quick to charm. At the time of Sam's death, no one had suspected foul play. It had been ruled an accident, a tragic fall during a hike. But now, Anna saw the gaps, the inconsistencies, and the way Mark had distanced himself after the funeral. Her grief turned to anger, then to a simmering fury. How could he live with himself, knowing what he had done? How could he sit at family gatherings, laugh at jokes, and pretend to grieve? Anna decided she couldn't let it go. It was a brisk autumn evening when Anna confronted Mark. She found him at his home, a modest house on the outskirts of Black Hollow. He opened the door, his face lighting up with feigned warmth. "Anna, what a surprise," he said, ushering her inside. The sight of him made her stomach churn, but she forced a smile. "Hi, Mark. I thought we could catch up." They sat in his living room, a fire crackling in the hearth. Anna made small talk, masking the storm brewing inside her. Finally, she couldn't hold back any longer. "Do you ever think about Sam?" she asked, her voice deceptively calm. Mark's expression faltered for a fraction of a second before he recovered. "Of course I do. I miss him every day." Anna leaned forward, her eyes boring into his. "Do you miss what you did to him?" Mark froze, his face paling. "What are you talking about?" "I know the truth, Mark," she said, her voice cold. "I know you pushed him. I know you killed him." His eyes darted around the room as if searching for an escape. "That's insane. Sam's death was an accident. Stop lying." Anna snapped, her voice rising. "I saw it, Mark. I saw what you did. You argued with him, and you pushed him. You killed him, and you've been lying about it ever since." Mark's face twisted with a mix of fear and anger. "You don't know what you're talking about," he hissed. "You weren't there. You don't understand what happened." "Then tell me," Anna demanded. "Tell me what really happened." For a moment, Mark looked like he might deny it again, but then his shoulders slumped. He buried his face in his hands, his voice barely above a whisper. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that. We were arguing, yes, but I didn't mean for him to fall. It was an accident." "You called it an accident?" Anna spat, her voice trembling with fury. "You pushed him, Mark. You killed him. And then you let everyone believe it was his fault." Tears streamed down Mark's face as he shook his head. "I was scared, Anna. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to go to prison." Anna stood, her hands balled into fists. "You've been living a lie for years while the rest of us mourned him. You stole his life, and you think crime will make it better." Mark didn't respond, his sobs filling the silence. That night, Anna sat in her darkened living room, the weight of the confrontation pressing down on her. She had thought knowing the truth would bring her closure, but instead, it left her with a burning question. What now? The man in the yellow coat had warned her. Truth couldn't be undone, and now it was hers to carry. She felt a deep, gnawing unease, as if she had only scratched the surface of something far more sinister. A week later, Anna received a knock at her door. It was Mrs. Holloway, the frail woman who had once spoken to the man in the yellow coat. Her face was drawn and pale, her eyes wide with fear. "You've seen him again, haven't you?" Mrs. Holloway asked. Anna hesitated. "No, not since that night." "Why?" Mrs. Holloway glanced over her shoulder, as if expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. "He doesn't just give you the truth and leave. There's always more." "What do you mean?" Anna asked, a chill running down her spine. Mrs. Holloway leaned closer, her voice a hoarse whisper. "The man in the yellow coat doesn't reveal truths out of kindness. He does it because he feeds on what happens next. The chaos, the destruction, it's what sustains him." Anna's blood ran cold. She thought back to her confrontation with Mark, the rage and pain it had unleashed. She realized now that the man had known exactly what would happen, had anticipated the chain reaction her discovery would set off. "What does he want from me?" Anna asked, her voice trembling. "To watch," Mrs. Holloway said. "To see how far you'll go." Anna felt a surge of nausea. She had thought she was in control, but now she realized she was just a pawn in his twisted game. That night, Anna sat in her living room, staring at the flickering shadows on the walls. She felt his presence before she saw him. Turning slowly, she found the man in the yellow coat standing in the corner of the room, his face hidden as always. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't respond immediately, but when he did, his words were laced with dark amusement. "I want to see what you'll do with the truth," he said. "Will you seek justice? Revenge? Or will you let it consume you?" "I didn't ask for this," Anna said, tears streaming down her face. "But you did," he replied, "and now the choice is yours. The truth is a fire. Anna, will you let it warm you? Or will you let it burn everything you love to ash?" And then, as suddenly as he had appeared, he was gone. Anna sat alone in the silence of her living room, the man's parting words echoing in her mind. "The truth is a fire. Will you let it warm you? Or will you let it burn everything you love to ash?" The weight of her choice loomed over her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that no matter what she decided, the man in the yellow coat would win. He had lit the match, and now it was her life that smoldered. Over the next few days, Anna grappled with what to do. Her confrontation with Mark had left him a wreck, but it wasn't enough. She couldn't stop thinking about Sam, the vibrant, kind-hearted brother who had been taken from her. Mark's confession didn't satisfy her. It only fanned the flames of her anger. The thought of justice gnawed at her. Mark had stolen a life. Shouldn't he face the consequences? Shouldn't everyone know what he had done? Anna began compiling evidence, going through old photos, diaries, and every shred of information she could find from the night of Sam's death. The vision from the pit played in her mind like a cursed loop. She wanted to expose Mark for what he was, a liar, a murderer, but a nagging voice in the back of her mind warned her that this path could only lead to more destruction. That evening, she received a call from her mother. "Anna, have you spoken to Mark recently?" her mother asked, concern evident in her voice. Anna hesitated. "Why do you ask?" "He's not himself," her mother said. "He called me last night, saying things I couldn't understand. Something about forgiveness and demons." Anna's stomach twisted. The man in the yellow coat was still at work, stoking the fires he had started. "Do you think he's in danger?" Anna asked. "I don't know," her mother replied, "but I'm worried about him. Can you check on him, please?" Anna agreed reluctantly, knowing she was walking into a storm. When Anna arrived at Mark's house, the door was ajar. The house was eerily quiet, the air inside heavy with an unexplainable tension. "Mark," she called out, stepping inside. She found him in the living room, sitting on the floor with his back against the couch. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot and sunken. Scattered around him were crumpled papers, empty bottles, and a photograph of Sam. He looked up at her, his expression a mix of fear and despair. "He came to me," Mark whispered. Anna's blood ran cold. "Who came to you?" Mark's hands trembled as he pointed to the corner of the room. "Him, the man in the yellow coat." Anna felt the walls close in around her. "What did he say to you?" "He asked me a question," Mark said, his voice barely audible. "He asked me if I was ready to pay the price." The words hit Anna like a punch to the gut. She knew now that the man wasn't just a bringer of truth. He was a harbinger of judgment. "What did you tell him?" Anna asked, dreading the answer. "I told him I didn't know," Mark said, tears streaming down his face. And then he smiled. God, Anna, his smile. It's not human. Anna knelt in front of him, gripping his shoulders. "Listen to me, Mark. You need to leave town. Go somewhere far away, where he can't find you." Mark shook his head. "It's too late." He said he'll be back tonight. As night fell, Anna stayed with Mark, unable to leave him alone. The hours dragged by, the oppressive silence broken only by the ticking of a clock. And then, just past midnight, the air in the room grew cold. A familiar sense of dread washed over Anna, and she knew he had arrived. The man in the yellow coat stood in the doorway, his presence dominating the room. His hat cast a shadow over his face, but Anna could feel his gaze piercing through her. "Anna," he said, his voice soft but resonant. "You shouldn't be here. You stay away from him," Anna said, standing between the man and her brother. The man tilted his head slightly, as if amused. "This is not your choice to make," Mark whimpered, clutching his knees. "I'll do whatever you want. Just don't hurt me." The man stepped closer, his yellow coat glinting in the dim light. "It is not about hurt," he said. "It is about balance. Your actions tipped the scales, and now they must be righted." Anna's mind raced. She couldn't let Mark face this alone, no matter what he had done. "Take me instead," she blurted out. The man paused, his head tilting again. "Interesting," he said. "Are you willing to carry his burden, knowing the weight of his guilt?" Anna swallowed hard. Yes. The room seemed to darken as the man considered her offer. Very well, he said finally. But remember, Anna, the truth comes at a cost. Before she could react, he raised a hand, and the world around her blurred. She felt herself falling, her mind consumed by visions of Sam's final moments. She relived his pain, his fear, and his betrayal. But there was more. She saw Mark's life unraveling under the weight of his guilt, his every action haunted by what he had done. When the visions ended, Anna collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath. The man in the yellow coat was gone, and so was Mark. Anna woke in her own bed, her mind reeling. She didn't know how she had gotten there, but the memories of what had happened were clear. She felt the burden of Mark's guilt pressing down on her like a physical weight, a constant reminder of the truth she had uncovered. In the days that followed, she learned that Mark had left town. No one knew where he had gone, and Anna didn't try to find him. She carried his secret now, a heavy, unyielding truth that would stay with her for the rest of her life. And every so often, in the quiet moments of the night, she felt the cold presence of the man in the yellow coat, watching from the shadows, waiting for the next time someone dared to seek the truth.